I have mentioned to you before that we do read the comments that you provide. ACDI is a full-service professional services organization that wants to help you by providing the information that you want or need. You know, today is a great example of this. First off, by alternating the times of our webinars to give more people a chance to join. And we've reviewed and have come up with some topics of interest that you have requested. We're going to begin today by looking at the ins and outs of Active Directory integration, what it does, and how to implement a synchronization with Active Directory. Pull printing, or Find Me printing, is also on the agenda, and we'll discuss best practices for getting this feature up and running. Plus, we'll also talk about campus security, how to protect your environment with tips and tricks that anyone can use. ACDI, powered by PaperCut, also provides world-class hardware like coin ops and card readers to complete your pay-for-print environment. And we also provide support for mobile printing with Printer On. For your document capture needs, check out SciCapture, extremely powerful software with integrations into all sorts of ECM products, available now from ACDI. Casey Cobb is handling the Q&A and the chat during the presentation. Hey now, I'm Doc Balgi, your host for this technical webinar. Thanks for joining today. Pay close attention to the webinar. We're going to do this, a trivia question at the end of the presentation, and it'll be your chance to win a very cool ACDI t-shirt or polo. So let's get going today with our discussion of PaperCut's Active Directory integration. PaperCut accesses Active Directory in a read-only way for user authentication and extracting user account metadata like email address, full name, office, department, and group membership. Write access or elevated rights access is not required. When running on a Windows server, PaperCut uses native Active Directory APIs. When running on a Linux or Mac system, PaperCut accesses Active Directory via the remote LDAP interface. Now, PaperCut will never cache user rights credentials, like their passwords. This is in line with security best practice. User authentication is done via real-time interrogation at the moment of authentication. User account metadata, like their full name and stuff, is cached locally to minimize the load on the Active Directory server. And it's only queried during initial account creation, on-demand user creation, during overnight sync, if enabled, and during a manual user group sync. Yes, PaperCut does have multi-domain support, and it's commonly used in complex tree forest arrangements. Enable multi-domain support. Select this option for larger sites running multiple trusted domains. For example, in an educational environment, it's common to have separate domains for students and staff and teachers with a one-way trust relationship. This option can bring in groups, OUs, and users from both domains. The list of users is semicolon separated. This list should contain the name of the domains in DNS dot notation, and you should include the name of the current domain if you want to import from that domain. Then just click Test to verify that the settings resulted in the desired behavior. Total number of user accounts is a good measure. Now, by default, PaperCut runs as the local system account. This is generally regarded as best practice for services. The local system account should have access to query the Active Directory with read-only access, and that's in most default domain environments. If, however, the server is not a member of the domain, maybe it's in another domain, or the Active Directory environment has been locked down from defaults, then some further configuration might be required. The solution is to elevate the privileges used to run the PaperCut application server service. And this is done in Windows, not in PaperCut. Go to Windows, Control Panel, Admin Tools, Services. Select the PaperCut Application Server Service, and then the Logon tab. Change the service account to an account that has both local admin rights and at least read access to Active Directory. Best practice suggests that you should create a new service account and set the account's password to never expire. In an Active Directory domain, all users have a primary group, and that's really used only for legacy reasons for the most part. By default, the primary group of all Active Directory users is set to the built-in domain users group. That's outlined in red right here on this screenshot. It's recommended that you leave domain users as the primary group. This is best practice suggested by Microsoft, and use standard groups for management. Now, due to a limitation in Active Directory, when a user is a member of a group, by virtue of it being the user's primary group, they are not reported as a member of that group when using the Active Directory APIs. So, for example, if a user's primary group is set to a group called staff, then the user will not appear to be a member of staff when using selected Active Directory APIs. Now, this limitation is discussed in detail in the following Microsoft Knowledge Base article. That's Knowledge Base number 275523. I just put the link on the screen. I know you can't click on the link, but there's your reference there. Now, this behavior can adversely affect PaperCut's group-based features, of course, like quota allocation or new user creation rules, because the user is not correctly reported as being a member of the group. So for this reason, it's highly recommended to leave domain users as the primary group for all users of your domain. But if you need to use a group in PaperCut that's also used as a primary group, where users are a member of a group by virtue of it being their primary group, then the workaround is to create a mirror group. For example, if you have a group called staff, and you're unable to use this group because of the primary group problem, create a new group. Call it Staff Standard or something like that. And then add staff members to this group. You can take advantage of Active Directory's query system to quickly identify and add the staff users. Now, this new group, Staff Standard, can then accurately be used in PaperCut. And in this discussion of groups and how they react with Active Directory, I did want to give a reminder that PaperCut is operating system agnostic. I mean, there's no problem running in a Linux environment, and I personally have set up an all Mac environment, so there's no problem with installing PaperCut on Windows, Mac, Linux, and Novell too, for that matter. I do want to point out that due to limitations in the various LDAP protocol implementations, nested group functionality is not available if you're not using Windows Active Directory as a sync source. You'll need to use a flat group instead. We recommend taking this into consideration when opting to use Linux or Mac OS X. If Windows is in the mix and you're using queue redirection, then I would strongly recommend sharing Windows queues, as it's much easier to connect a Mac to Windows than it is Windows to Mac. Back to some Active Directory stuff. PaperCut does not impose a 20-character long username limit. However, when using Windows Active Directory, we utilize the SAM account name. This is what is seen as the owner of the print job in the print queues as circled in red in the attached screenshot. Now, this Active Directory field does have a 20-character limit, which you can read about in the Microsoft article that's listed on the screen there. And you'll also notice that the username is actually much longer than the SAM account name, so I wanted you to know which field was referenced. Now, internally, PaperCut's limit on username is 50 characters. PaperCut speaks natively with Active Directory. And that's what makes this integration so fluid. If you're using AD as it is, using the predefined fields, then everything is really flawless. If you have a department or office listed in the user profile, then reporting in PaperCut can provide more accurate results as those fields are natively looked at inside of PaperCut. That means you don't have to do anything except keep your Active Directory clean. And you know what? Unfortunately, that's the hard part. It's really with much dismay that I report very few well-organized and maintained directories. Not sure why. I mean, it can really simplify your IT life, and not just with PaperCut, but with networking in general. Pushing out printers via GPO only takes a couple of minutes, and you can affect the entire organization. I mean, how cool is that? Now, sometimes you may want to change things. So for the standard Active Directory integrations, these are the following config keys that are available for Active Directory synchronization. We'll start with user-source.ad.user-pin-field. Now, that one will import a user's PIN from a custom field, and this one is only digits. The next one here, the user-source.ad.other-emails-field, will import a user's other email address, like a secondary email address from a custom field. Then we have user-source.ad.email-address-field, and that'll use a custom attribute for the primary email address instead of the mail attribute. And finally, user-source.ad.group-ou-filter. If you have a long list of groups, use this config key to display groups only under a certain organizational unit. So, for example, if you've got it set to myorganization.local/import-ou/subimport-ou, then it displays only the groups under subimport-ou. Now, if you need more customization than that for your synchronization, then you'll want to use PaperCut's LDAP integration. That is beyond the scope of today's webinar, but let's just say it's possible. And where might you find information on that? I talk about it all the time. PaperCut's open knowledge base. You don't have to have an account. There's no need to log in. I mean, really, who does that? PaperCut, of course. www.papercut.com/KB, and that stands for Knowledge Base. Search for LDAP if that's what you need, and you'll have all the info. Or try Directory Services for many others, like our exciting G Suite integration. We talked about that last month. Now, that webinar is posted on our YouTube channel if you need to review it, and don't forget to subscribe to ACDI's YouTube channel. You'll also get notification when we post this recorded webinar. I'll finish our discussion of Active Directory integration by letting you know that you can also sync with two sources. In other words, Active Directory and G Suite, or Active Directory and LDAP, whatever you need. And that's why network administrators like PaperCut. It just works. Pull printing, or find me printing. It's best described not by what it does, but by the problem that it solves. Consider a large organization with hundreds of printers. The task of selecting the best printer from the list at the time of print can be daunting. Organizations tend to mitigate this concern by using a number of methods, like naming conventions. Use a printer naming convention that helps users locate the best printer. A common convention is to use the room name or maybe the floor number, and this is usually complemented by a sign on the printer itself. Location adaptive login scripts. Now, a location adaptive login script automatically adds printers to a computer based on the computer's physical location, which is donated by the computer name. So, for example, any workstation that contains second level in their name can have the two printers on the second level by default. Users need to consult the full list of printers only on the rare occasion that they want to print to a printer outside of their physical level or their room. A global profile. Administrators map the best printer based on location of the workstation. Any user that logs into the computer has the most appropriate printer selected by default. All these methods do have their drawbacks and require careful planning on the part of the administrator and the need for end users to understand conventions and processes and all sorts of stuff. Find Me printing solves the problem by asking the print job to find the user rather than having the user find the printer. And it works like this. Step 1, the user prints to a single site-wide global queue where it's held on a server queue, as shown in Step 2. The release, step number 3, can be done in a variety of ways, as shown. A user can walk up to a multifunctional device, log in with a proximity card, maybe an ID number or other credentials. They locate their job and release it. A release station can be set up for a user to log in with, select their job, and it automatically prints to the printer closest to the release station. Another option is a fast release that can be set up on a single function printer for a user to swipe a card or use an ID number, and all of their print jobs print out. Maybe we even want to use a QR code. It can be placed on any device for a user to snap with their smart device to obtain their job. Find Me Printing works by redirecting a job targeted at one print queue to another. So printer compatibility is important. For example, a job designed to print on an inkjet photo printer is not usually suitable for printing on a laser printer. So that brings up the question, which driver to use? When redirecting a job from one queue to another, the job is rendered by the source queue's driver and printed by the destination queue's printer. It's therefore vital that the destination printer is compatible with the source driver, as we've discussed in previous webinars. I'll also mention again that for best practice when installing PaperCut, you should bring in the devices, put them on the network, and get them printing as normal. Then install PaperCut. I can't stress this enough, and it will make your life so much easier because PaperCut uses native printing from the manufacturer. So get that working first. Okay, Casey, help me off this soapbox, would you please? Anyway, to be compatible, the source or the virtual print queue and the destination print queue must at least use drivers that produce the same print language, like PostScript to PostScript, maybe PCL5 to PCL5. However, due to the differences in the way each manufacturer uses a print language, and even differences between models from the same manufacturer, compatibility can be limited to printers of the same or similar models. I mean, the ideal setup for job redirection is when all target printers are of the same model, but that's typically not the case. And when it's not the case, select a driver for the virtual queue that gives the best result across your fleet of destination printers. Sometimes you might need to create groups of virtual print queues, like a queue for one manufacturer and another virtual queue for a second manufacturer. Keep that in mind when not all of the users are power users. I mean, the copier just might have a finisher that'll make coffee for you, and please let me know when that's available, by the way, but perhaps not every worker drinks coffee, so they don't need that feature. A great way to achieve compatibility with a wide range of PostScript printers in Windows is to use PaperCut's global print driver on the virtual or the source print queue. If instead you want to use a manufacturer driver for the virtual print queue, pick a simple lowest common denominator driver and test it for compatibility with each one of your drivers. On the Mac, the generic PostScript driver is a good choice. On Windows, select a color PostScript driver for the mid-range popular model. Always carefully test driver compatibility before implementing Find Me Printing. Take care to address all printing features like advanced graphics, any other options, grayscale mode, paper sizes, duplexing, even tray selection. If a common driver cannot be found, you might need to implement multiple virtual queues. Hopefully you saw last month's webinar about G Suite integration, where PaperCut introduced the ability to staple from a few manufacturers. As you can see, there's a good list of OEMs that we're compatible with, and if yours isn't on the list, then head over to the partner portal. I think it's still the third topic down in the latest news from PaperCut. Download the instructions. Do some testing. I mean, honestly, it'll take you about a half hour or less, and send the results to PaperCut. Then those drivers will be added, and pretty soon we'll have a complete list. You know, PaperCut supports about 20 different manufacturers now. Now, best practice is to test your drivers before rolling them all out. I mean, that could really save you hours of troubleshooting by just doing a few test prints first. Hey, let's shift gears now into security practices that should be followed if you are serious about managing your devices. I was chatting with Nasir, and he reminded me of a very detailed white paper from PaperCut for securing your environment. I'm not going to read that to you during the webinar. However, we will look at some of those best practices for campus security. And I got to give a shout out to Glenn, too, for some thoughts on this. First off, the white paper is available on the Knowledge Base site. You know, I talked about it before, www.papercut.com/KB. Just search for security white paper, and it'll bring you to the PDF for download. Excellent article, by the way. Casey Cobb will be doing our sales webinar a little bit later on, 1 o'clock this afternoon, and it's going to be on education. And so that's why we're concentrating on some of these things right now, security and education. So do want to point that out for Casey this afternoon. And if you're looking for sales information, make sure you go to our website. And you won't be able to sign in ahead of time, but you will be able to log in just a couple of minutes before that starts. Again, 1 o'clock Central Time, same station, same bat time, same bat station, all that good stuff. Anyway, back to this. Device logins. Device logins. Multifunctionals. Ever hear of a site called LMGTFY? It stands for, let me Google that for you. Well, I tell you, students know how to use Google, too, probably better than many of us. So how hard is it to Google the admin password for, XYZ copier? You'll have the results in moments, and from past experience, I know that many, perhaps most schools have not changed the default admin password to the multifunctional device because they want to make it easy for someone to work on, or steal from, or misuse, or whatever. Changing the device login is easy to do, and it's free. Educators love that. I would start with that one today. Schools and universities are not the only place that PaperCut has been installed, but it certainly has been battle-tested in those environments. I've set up a lot of school systems or been invited to campuses to discuss security, and I'll take a look at the device, and what do I see? The IP address, neatly labeled with a P-touch, something like that. Makes it easy for IT staff to get to the device if there's a problem, of course, but what did I just say about passwords? Or if I know anything about printers, maybe I connected one at home, I could probably download the driver for this device. I know the IP address. I'll bet I could connect to it and print whatever I want, and no one will know. And they're correct, unless they get caught picking up the physical output. So how do you prevent people from connecting directly and circumventing any type of print management? Well, use IP filtering. Only list the PaperCut server IP and maybe an admin or IT computer to connect, for instance, so the job has to come from one of those computers. The device will only accept print jobs from the IP addresses you list in this filter. MFPs today, they're like mini computers. They do all sorts of stuff. So best practice is to treat your MFP as a computer. Put some security around it. This is another free option to implement, and it can prevent a lot of miscellaneous print jobs from happening because you just might not know who is connected to the device. This next idea is not a free one, but they might have something like this already in place, and that's the use of VLAN technology. This is a way to separate computers, printers, and all types of devices by using ACLs to control who gets to what. Don't you love acronyms? We have a lot of fun with them on the pre-sale side. We talk about TLAs, or three-letter acronyms. I know VLAN's a four-letter, but an ACL is a TLA. ACL is Access Control List. And it does exactly what it says. It controls access to whatever you need with a list. Easy enough, right? Well, not only do many MFPs have computers in them, but some even broadcast Wi-Fi and other protocols. I mean, after all, they want to make it easy to print to the device, and I get it, but there's a trade-off to wide-open printing and controlled printing. Printing can be controlled and can make a huge difference to the bottom line of any corporation or school. Many devices today have Bonjour enabled with a default Bonjour service name, so an iOS user can pull out their phone. If they're on the same network, they can fire off an unsecured print right away. Some manufacturers call this MDNS instead of Bonjour as well. Mopria settings are starting to show up, and those are for Android. Plus, some printers now can actually broadcast themselves as an access point, allowing any type of device to connect to it and print on its own internal network. Convenient, sure, but totally uncontrolled and, more importantly, not tracked. Older and or unused protocols should be turned off. You don't need them. And while having Apple Talk turned on probably won't hurt anything, as there are very few Macs out there running OS 9 or earlier, but you never know. FTP printing, IPX, SPX, you don't need them. And someone might find a way to exploit these holes as well. It's another freebie for the campus administrator, too. Just requires a little time to look at the devices and reconfigure them if necessary. Another printing convenience feature showing up on almost every MFP today is the ability to print from your USB stick. And with some devices, we can actually track this, but why offer it at all? I actually see tons of problems with flash drive printing. So many times an end user comes up with a Word or an Excel file, and they don't understand why they can't print that document. So instead of going through all the hassle of putting up signs to let people know what file type they can print, if they even know what that means, and perhaps even running the risk of someone putting in a USB drive with malware on it, turn it off. With so much content online, connections improving, USB drives will most likely be a thing of the past very soon anyway. Turn it off. And speaking of turning it off, Bluetooth. There's another great idea to have on your printer. As mentioned earlier, MFPs today are like computers. They get set up like a computer. They're prone to some of the same issues as computers, and they want to behave like one too, except your MFP is a peripheral. Not only do you have a bunch of stuff that can fail when you put it all on one item, but now you're asking it to do things that it doesn't need to do. There's no reason I know of to have Bluetooth on so someone can connect to your printer and print without restriction. Turn this off too. Casey, I think I got up on the soapbox again, so if you'll kindly just help me down, we'll wrap this webinar up. All right. Active Directory integration. Seamless with PaperCut. And since Windows is still the predominant enterprise operating system, it's great that PaperCut makes it easy. Pull printing, or Find Me Print, as defined in PaperCut, is a great roaming service that allows for authenticated users to pick up their prints anywhere. And with what we hear every day, best practice in security should be discussed and reviewed on a regular basis, and most of the tips we gave today don't even cost your customer anything. These topics today came out of your comments, so after the webinar, when you get the pop-up, fill it out if there's something you'd like us to address. And of course, all of this brought to you with a little help from your friends at ACDI. I'm Doc Balgi. Thanks for joining.